What's up, guys? Welcome back to the newest episode of the Primllife podcast. I have a man on today who more so resembles a force of nature than an actual human being. Some of the numbers that this guy's put up in various lifts are honestly, it's not even elite anymore. It's record setting and world size. Absolutely insane what this man has done. Matt Wenning is both a very accomplished powerlifter, a coach, and an entrepreneur. So I'll let him introduce himself and tell a story.
Yeah. So name's Matt Wenning. Grew up in a small town in Indiana. Pushed myself to do an internship with the Indianapolis Colts when I was 19, and then started to set my sights on being a professional strength coach at a pro football team at that age. Was directed by a guy named John Toring, which was Peyton Manning's strength coach. So I'm sure everybody knows who that is. He was one of the longest lasting strength coaches in one team. He was the head strength coach for the Indianapolis Colts for 17 years. So, you got to know what you're doing to stay in one team that long in the NFL. So he kind of set my sights on understanding that I was going to need a master's degree. So luckily, when I went back home, my hometown school, Ball State, was one of the top 3 in the country for exercise science and number 1 in the country for biomechanics. So when I enrolled in school at my hometown, I was surprisingly lucky that was all lined up it almost seemed like the stars lined up at the right time. Started my process there. I won my first world championships when I was 19. I squatted a shade under 700, benched right at 500, and pulled a shade under 700 at 19 years old. Did my first bench press competition at 13. I was almost 14 at bench 250. That was before gear. And then hit 480 something when I was in high school as a senior. And then as a junior athlete, which is college age, I broke the American record in the squat, the total, and the bench press. I won collegiate nationals in the USAPL 2 years in a row, and then won nationals 2 years in a row. Turned pro in 2004 and was one of the youngest guys and lightest guys to squat 900 pounds. I did that at 24 years old. And then fast forward to 26, 7 years old, I was top 5, top 6 in the world in the total. 2008, I broke the all-time world record in the total. 2009, I had one of the highest subtotals in history with a little over 1,100 pound squat and over an 800 pound equipped bench. And then in 2011, broke the world record in the squat at 1197.6 at 308. And then 2012, I benched 600 raw. That put me in the top 15 of all time, regardless of body weight in the bench press. And then 2014, I broke the all-time world record in the squat raw with no knee wraps. Then moved the world record squat up another 40 pounds the next year, and then benched 611 in the same meet, which was the highest subtotal ever done under 300 pounds at that time. And after that, I just pretty much decided to retire at about the end of 2017. Some of my best gym lifts were 585 for a triple on the bench, 825 for a double on the deadlift, 1125 for a double on the squat, and then raw. I had done, I want to say 855 for 2. So those were kind of my biggest numbers that I ever hit in the gym, ever did in competition. And all through that, getting a master's degree and doing multiple military contracts. And now I work with tons of fire departments in the area, run my own facility, and then obviously run a humongous website business now where we do a lot of online coaching. I fabricate and make a lot of equipment. We actually build it ourselves here in Ohio. We don't outsource it to another place. And I think that's about covers it. I'm pretty known for manuals, and now I help Julius Maddox with his 800 pound bench press.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely insane. The list of lifts, even your earlier numbers, are things that people can't even fathom after a lifelong of training. What exactly does it take to separate a good lifter from the elite lifter like you?
That's a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of factors. I think some people can bring different tools to the table and still, achieve similar results. For me, it was consistency. I don't feel like I had a better setting genetics wise than most people. Maybe I was a little bigger than most kids, but what I did have is that I was consistent. I would imagine in all the years I just told you that I was training, in total, I have missed right at or a little more or less than 6 months of training in 27 years. Now, doing that meant that I never had to get injured. So I only ever had one injury that took me a few months to heal from. Luckily, it was healable. I tore a groin in 2014. But other than that, I've never had a knee injury. I've never had a back injury. I've had tweaks and pulls here and there, but nothing crazy because I feel that I train very, very smart. I think the hardest part between being good and great is understanding how to throttle up and how to throttle down. When you're trying to get good, you have to work hard. When you get great, you have to learn how to work smart.
Mm-hmm. No, I definitely agree with that. It's a big skill difference. I feel like with lifters and just how they train at such a high level, the smallest things can make such a massive difference. What reason did you start lifting?
I don't know. I guess as an older man now, looking back, probably finding a father figure. My dad passed away when I was 13 from an odd cancer caused by Agent Orange. My dad was in Vietnam. And so probably going and looking for male role models in the gym as a young man, or even a young kid, not really understanding why I was doing that. I think it was, I first walked into the gym and everybody thought I was older than what I was, because at 13, I was already 165 pounds. So I was already a pretty big kid, and I wasn't carrying a lot of body fat, but I was just a husky kid. I wasn't jacked or anything. I didn't have any freaky genetics per se. I was just big. And once I got into the local YMCA, there were a handful of guys, namely Tim Smith and Jim Dawson, that were national ranked lifters into themselves. Jim Dawson being one of the first men to pull 700 in the Midwest at 242 back in the early 70s. And then Tim Smith was a 500-pound bencher at 181 body weight raw. And when they saw me, they knew I had some potential. So that's probably how I got into it so good, is because I found good role models, and they may not have known everything about training, but they knew not to over push me, and they knew to create work capacity and a love of just training before I was a competitor. So I think that was probably what started the process in the right direction.
Oh, for sure. When you are preparing for those bigger lifts, how do you mentally set yourself up to perform optimally?
That can be different for everybody. My personal way that I do it is I always opened up light. I think that's a big mistake a lot of people make, is they say, I want to squat 1,200. So I'm not going to open up probably with anything within 150 pounds of that. So maybe 1,050. And what I want to do is set my mental game up to where everything feels light that day. So if I pick up 1,050, think about it. Like if you're a 400-pound bencher, that would be like you starting at like 275.
Yeah.
That's not very big as far as mentality wise, but I think a lot of people have too much ego with what they open up with. So my thought process was I would go in and do an opener and it would be easy. And then my mind, every rep after that, I wouldn't be listening to what they were putting on the bar. All I would tell my brain is do the same thing you just did. So it thought it was 1,050 every rep. So I did 1,050, and then the next one would be like 1,125. But in my mind, I didn't hear them announce it. I just think I got to do 1,050 again. So I built that confidence. And at those weights, you can't feel the difference in pressure. Mm-hmm. You think you go from 1,150 to 1,125, that's 75 pounds, but that's less than like 8%. So when you pick it up, it's not going to feel any heavier. It's not like going from 135 to 200, right? That's around 70 pounds. But for a weak lifter or a beginning lifter, that is a monstrous jump. Yeah. But for an advanced lifter, that's not. So in percentage base. So I always opened up light and then mentally prepped myself to feel like I just had to do that 3 times.
Crazy. How did you stay safe when you were lifting those maximal amount of weights?
I think that the reason that I didn't get injured was because I got strong slowly, meaning that let's look at the timeline. The first year I squatted over 1,000 pounds was 2006. So in 2006, I squatted 1,000 pounds, 1,003. 2007, I squatted 1,040. So it's a 30 pounds difference. That's what, 2%?
Mhm.
Then the next year, I squat 1,080, another 3 or 4% maybe gain. Then
Yeah.
the next year, I squat 1110. Then the next year, I squat 1150, right? Then the next year, I squat 1200. My point is I only got 2 or 3% stronger every meet, but that 2 or 3% was massive because you're already at world class numbers. So the point is, I think people see, oh, look, you squatted 1200. But what they don't realize is that it took me to go from 1,003 pounds to 1197. It took me from 2008 to 2011.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you ever think that you could do more than
You
that
know,
max?
so
Sorry, go ahead.
at 1,200,
Yeah. Could you ever like beat that again if you're in your prime?
yeah, oh yeah.
Oh.
Because when I took it, it was a wild guess. The world record was 1192. I knew I needed to beat it with 1197. Okay,
Mhm.
so I went for the all-time record because one, I knew at those weights, if one small incident happened, everything's gone. Like,
Yeah.
if your knee goes out or your back goes out with that amount of weight, it's not going to be recoverable. So
Mhm.
for me, it was a risk to benefit ratio. I wanted to break the all-time world record. I wanted to be the strongest man in the world, at least at one point in time, with one major lift, which was the squat. And so it was worth it to me at that time to break the record. So, in my opinion, if I would have stayed in gear and I would have trained based on how the 1197 felt and how smart I was with my training, I feel that 1235 to 1260 would have been right in that range.
Crazy. That's absolutely
Because
insane.
if you think about it, if I go from 1197 to 1230, that's only another 2 or 3% jump. And I
Mhm.
made that 1197 look pretty easy.
Yeah.
So, so I'm like I said, I'm just taking a small guess. My guesstimate was 1220 was capable of that day when I did 1197.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Biomechanically, do you think that there's much more room for growth with today's current like world record numbers, or have we kind of tapped out the potential for powerlifters and their max lifts?
you know what? Until I saw Maddox come along. So let's look. I would say the lift that has the most genetic prowess is the bench press, right? Because you even see guys that are perfectly built to bench press, and nobody's doing the numbers that Maddox is doing. Maddox is 6'3". He's not a short guy, and it's not like he has a super short range of motion, but he has an exorbitant amount of starting power,
Yeah.
which you can't teach. Somebody either has that or they don't. Now, you can polish what you have, but you can't teach that kind of explosiveness. So, in my thought process, I think that we have maxed in bodybuilding the level of muscularity that the human body can achieve, even with drugs. But what
Mhm.
I don't think we've learned how to tap into is the neurological capacity in which the tissue can function. So I'm not so sure that, I would have never have thought when I saw, Churchill hit that, 734 bench press. When Maddox came along and beat that and then beat it again by another 30, 40 pounds, that bench press went from 705 to 710 to 715 to 720, et cetera, for 15, 20 years. And then all of a sudden you get a guy come from nowhere and beat it by 40 pounds.
Yeah.
That's just stuff just doesn't happen. So the point is that I would have said 10 years ago that we were reaching the point of physical capacity. But now with somebody like that can break a world record by 40, I'm not so sure. I just think that there is definitely potential for people to be way stronger. But I think now that it doesn't rely so much in the muscle tissue as it does in the central nervous system.
No, for sure. And that kind of goes back to your point of like learning how to treat the body with recovery. If you're training hard, constantly, like very hard, your nervous system isn't going to have time to recover, and you're not going to be able to make those gains. You're going to get sick easier. You're going to feel weak throughout your day. Your lifts just aren't going to be max. How did you work on getting your nervous system to be as strong as it could be?
I think that a lot of that, and a lot of people are not going to want to hear this because it puts them after the fact. A lot of that's developed as a kid. If you look at the old Soviet manuals, they talk a lot about being in impeccable shape from the ages of 3 to 12. That doesn't necessarily mean lifting, but just being in great shape allows capacity. Once you have work capacity, then your ability to train harder without overtraining is enhanced. Now, if you decide that you want to do that at 18 to 20 years old, you're already way behind the 8 ball. And then the body is almost trying to adjust to the current environment in which it's in. So my opinion is that your body really adjusts to loading between the ages, or ability to handle loading between the ages of 3 and 12. So if you haven't already created a great base like wrestling, football, gymnastics, tumbling, anything like that, if you don't have that type of a base, you're probably never going to reach your true maximal potential. You can always get better, but to be your best, I think that the process has to start way before you have any cognitive understanding of when that is. Obviously, your parents would have to be smart and understand how to start the stimulation process younger than when the lifting is an issue. It's more other things. So if you look at some of the strongest lifters to ever live, like Maddox, Gary Frank, and those dudes, they all came from different backgrounds in sports. They didn't just start powerlifting and now they're powerlifters. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, of course. And with all the Chinese weightlifters that are breaking records, what I found interesting was that they're all started out as gymnasts early on. Even before they start weight training, it's all they do body weight stuff just to really develop physically, even before the fact of like incorporating weightlifting. I thought that was really interesting. What do you do personally for your recovery?
Well, as the older I've gotten, it's hard because my situation is different. I live in a gym, so my job is a gym. So I have access to treadmills, reverse hypers, 45-degree back extensions. I'm constantly moving and coaching. So for me, it's easy. For the average person that, 85% of the workforce is sit down manual or sit down and just computer labor or basic sit down office jobs. So for that person to develop work capacity and recovery is much harder. So for me personally, it's a lot of Epsom salt baths. It's a lot of naps. It's a lot of eating correctly and structurally, meaning I have my meals all planned out through the day. And it's basically trying to stay away from stressful environments. I find that if you can stay away from stressful environments, eat super clean and on a regiment, and train smart to stimulate, not annihilate, you got it all figured out.
No, of course. What does your nutrition look like now?
My nutrition is very highly based off of Stan Efferding's vertical diet. So I eat a lot of filet, ground beef, white rice, carrots, cranberry juice, not from concentrate, raw baby spinach leaves. Let's see. I don't take in very much sugar at all. I don't eat anything that upsets my stomach, which is a lot of cooking oils. I find that when you eat clean for a long time, i.e., say 1 to 2 years, even when you go and have a cheat meal with your friends, your body can't absorb it anymore. So what I noticed is, I'll give you an example. I'm sure you have a Five Guys like burger restaurant close to you or somewhere, and it's good, right? Yeah. So not very long ago, I went with some friends that wanted to go to Five Guys, and I'm like, no, screw it. I haven't had a cheat meal in a while. So we go there. I get 2 burgers. I get a thing of fries. I go all out, and I barely made it home before my stomach was completely destroyed.
Yeah.
I can't absorb anything like that anymore. So what I find is that people that eat super clean constantly, they can't handle cooking oils. They can't handle any kind of preservatives, like anything like that. You start really realizing how toxic that food really is for you based on the fact that your stomach can't handle it anymore.
Mm-hmm. When you see powerlifters nowadays that are in like very high level weight classes, they obviously have to consume a lot of calories to just keep that weight and keep building muscle. When it does come to sacrificing unhealthier foods for more calories that they need, how do you balance the two? And would you recommend maybe incorporating more sugars or fats to try and get that higher number of calories?
That's a tough question because I think that powerlifting is starting to change. if you look at a lot of the strongest guys now, let's say Larry Wheels, for example, he doesn't have any body fat,
Yeah.
right? You look at Ed Cohen back in his day, he didn't look fat. You looked at Bill Kazmaier back in his day, he didn't look fat. Here's my point. My point is that, yeah, every once in a while you're going to see a guy that has very low muscle definition and high body fat and is insanely strong, like Vasily Alexiev from Russia or my old training partner, Vlad Hasselhoff from Iran. You're going to see guys like that, but in my opinion, that type of inflammation and body fat that comes from that food and adipose tissue starts to wreak so much havoc on your hormonal system as far as natural testosterone is concerned that I don't feel that the excessive amount of calories is conducive for getting strong if you're thinking about it long term. So, you look even guys like Maddox, he carries quite a bit of body fat. I have never seen shoulders and arms on a human like that. Like if you see the pictures of him on Facebook or Instagram together, he outweighs me by 200 pounds right now. And he's only an inch and a half taller than me.
That's crazy.
So it's and it's not a ton of fat. So the point is that I even feel that Maddox could be that strong, even though he's around 450, 460. I still think he could be that strong and way under 400 with the right diet cleaning, because I think that the extra body fat is actually detrimental to his hormonal system. So I think that you're starting to see a trend change in the big time powerlifters, that you're not seeing the big fat guys as the strong guys anymore.
Yeah. And I feel like nowadays too with the fitness industry, especially with people more so my age, there's a big value placed on aesthetics and looking good. Do you see powerlifting continuing to kind of take that more more of a physique filch change, kind of like Larry Wheels competing at bodybuilding while still hitting PRs? Do you see bodybuilders and powerlifters kind of the worlds colliding a little bit more per se?
I think they do. I think they do quite a bit. I think they will even more in the future. And I think it's because the younger generations always go to looks first. I mean, when I went into the gym, my first thought was just look strong. I didn't realize that being strong and looking strong were very different.
Yeah.
And now I realize that some of it's the same. But I always try to tell the younger people is, listen, dudes, like, earn your aesthetics. You have to be an athlete first, and then you can work on aesthetics. I mean, let's look at the best bodybuilder in the last generation, Phil Heath. Right? What was he before he was a bodybuilder? A basketball player, and a good one.
Yeah.
He was a basketball player at a college level. So the point is that you have to be a good athlete first. And I think that's really hard for people to understand, I mean, you have to be a good athlete first, because you have to have that athletic base, or eventually if you build your base, at the end of a sand pit, it's just your house is going to fall down. You need concrete. So you got to have a concrete base built in athleticism, and then you can take it to bodybuilding or powerlifting or whatever. And that also includes dieting. I think really the difference between great powerlifters and great bodybuilders, although maybe some structural aesthetics like joint size per se that you can't change, is their discipline to diet. Yeah. So when you see somebody super shredded and you see somebody super strong and they look different, the one that's shredded has probably got a little bit more of an idea or a little bit more of an importance level in his mind to the dieting process. Whereas the other guy thinks that just lifting heavy weights is going to fix everything, right?
Yeah. No, of course.
So I would say for the younger guys is like, listen, earn your aesthetics. Like I didn't become an aesthetic lifter, and I don't consider myself a bodybuilder. I consider myself to have a lot of muscle and have pretty good physique for being an ex-powerlifter. But I didn't worry about that until my legs were 33 and a half inches around. I didn't worry about that until my arms were 21 inches already, when I could bench press 600. Then if I wanted to cut up from that point, it was easy, because then all I had to do was play with my diet. But what I find is that if you're so strict on your calories and you're so, held back because you don't want to lift heavy and you don't want to get stronger because you think that, maybe it's some sort of a cop out. what ends up happening is you're not going to develop all those big, dense fibers that really make you the best you can be when you're in your mid 30s and 40s. Let's be honest here. How many pro bodybuilders have won an Olympia under the age of 30? Not many.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because it takes so many years to build that quality muscle tissue. So whether you're drug-free or you're not drug-free, that's not an issue. The issue is time. And the only thing is time translates to most people is being consistent and being patient. Consistency and patience are the two things that separate guys that could be good from guys that are awesome.
No, of course. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Time under tension, fitness is both, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I feel like so many people nowadays, especially in like today's day and age with technology, they want everything, they want it fast, they want it now. Versus 10 years down the line, versus 20 years down the line, or in some case, the people who...
Yeah, and that's great. That's great for everything but your body.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can have that with trying to make money. You can have that with trying to finish school faster and taking more classes. You can have all of that. You try to take a shortcut in developing your body to either be a performance-oriented athlete or an aesthetic person, you are going to create a pitfall that is going to be very hard, if not impossible, to crawl out of.
Exactly. And when, especially at young age, I know that SARMs are very popular nowadays in the fitness industry. When to make that jump instead of training and maxing out your natural potential, you see so many kids, especially nowadays, they hop on anabolics and they'll make progress, they'll make it quick, but later down the line, their hormones are screwed up, their testosterone just doesn't rebound a lot of times. So what are your opinions on anabolic use?
Well, I'll tell you this. So, obviously to get to the numbers that I had to get, that wasn't all, you can't do all of that drug-free. I mean, I'm not going to sit there and blow smoke up anybody's ass. But I will tell you this. I did a lot of research before I went into any of that, and I didn't touch anything until I was 25. Mm-hmm. So all the collegiate national records I had, all the teenage world records I had, all the American records I had, and even the first professional 900-pound squat I had was drug-free. Yeah. Now, you can believe it or not believe it, whatever you want. But the point is that what I did was read a lot about Eastern Germany athletes and Russian athletes, and they had a couple of texts that were translated and articles that were translated that I got my hands on, and they wouldn't put any of their Olympic athletes on until their mid-20s. And what they found is that, let's say anabolic steroids bump your performance level up 10%. Well, if you do that at 300-pound bench, you just bench 330. Mm-hmm. You do that at a 500-pound bench, you just bench press 550. Which one would you rather have, right?
Yeah. 550.
So the point is, if you're already American record good, if you're already put the work, time, and effort and energy into giving yourself a natural base, then I feel like that's a time to have a sit down and come to Jesus meeting with yourself and figure out if those particular risks or benefits are worth it. I will tell you this, is that my first cycle of taking things was all prescribed from a doctor. So a lot of people don't know this, but when I was a kid, I was hit by a car and I was in full A cast for a whole year. So I was in a wheelchair for all of first grade. I had to be homeschooled. And they pumped me full, because of my surgeries in my legs, full of antibiotics, all kinds of medicine. Well, by the time I was in my early 20s, I started to find out that I had low T. Now, explain to me how I got that strong having a 325 level test. Okay. Yeah. So high natural is 800, and I hit all of those numbers with a 325. So what I'm here to tell you is that testosterone is not the end all be all to being better. Mm-hmm. It's still going to come down to mental capacity and consistency. And those two things can't be bought with a bottle and a syringe, right? Everybody thinks that, yeah, okay, you've enhanced the testosterone in the tissue and the anabolic property. If you don't have the mindset to train smart and the mindset to train intense enough, and then the mindset enough to recover, there's no way that any of those drugs are going to do what they're supposed to do. I'll give you a case in point. I get clients constantly in the gym that are already taking shit before they come to me. I have a guy in my gym right now that has literally taken 2 times more than I know people that have broke all-time world records. You know what his bench is? Now, let me rephrase this. He's been taking this amount of drugs for 10 years.
Oh my gosh.
So he's taken more than a gram of test, 1,000 milligrams of testosterone, and he takes 50 milligrams of D-ball a day, and he's done it for 10 years. You know what his bench is?
What's that at?
265.
Crazy. Yeah.
265. So if drugs were the answer to getting stronger, why did he bench 265? And me, on an anti-aging dose from a doctor, squatted 1,200.
Yeah.
Or benched 600 raw. You get my point?
Yeah.
Now, here's another thing I want all the kids to understand, and I'm sure Maddox would 100% want me to tell these to people. Maddox is the all-time world record bench presser at 775 pounds, okay? Raw. He takes a half of a cc of testosterone a week from a doctor for anti-aging because he had low T. So he takes a half a cc a week to bench almost 800 pounds raw. What makes you think that drugs are the answer? You get my point?
Exactly, yeah. And that's actually news to me as well. I would have honestly thought that he'd be in a lot more than that, but obviously it isn't the end all be all.
Before me and him became friends, I had the same thought process you did. I was like, this dude at 460 pounds, benching this kind of weight, has got to be on more stuff than a thoroughbred racehorse.
Yeah.
And when I sat down and talked with him, it wasn't the case. So you start realizing that really the drugs, they might enhance whatever you have, but they're not going to build that base.
Mm-hmm. And talking back on what you were mentioning earlier, would you say that base is consistency and just good nutrition overall?
I would say your base of what you can achieve is still going to come down to genetics. Okay. If if both of your parents are, heavily starved hillbillies from West Virginia that have never had any muscle tissue in the last 5 generations, your chances of breaking an all-time world record in any lift are going to be low. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible, and I'm not saying that you can't get better. But what I'm saying is that you have to already have some tools in the toolbox in order to be who you see on TV. But the reason you don't hear Arnold tell you that, and the reason you don't hear people like Ramy tell you that, is because that doesn't sell supplements.
Yeah.
Right? If you take this powder or you take this SARMs, you can be just like your idols. And in reality, I think we all know deep down inside that that's not true. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't be good or even break state or national records. It just means that the other thing genetics play a key role in is how fast those particular goals are achievable. So, for example, Maddox has only been competitively bench pressing for 6 years. Okay. Now, I competed when I broke my first 600 for 20 years. So he broke over 750 in 5, and I broke 620.
Mm-hmm.
Who has the better genetics?
Yeah.
You get my point?
Exactly.
So now it doesn't mean you can't keep working and striving to be better than what you are. But my point is that you got to have the genetics. That's going to be step 1. Step 2, you need to focus and consider the amount of time and energy that you really have to devote to what you want to do. Mm-hmm. Okay. So for me personally, everything revolved around my training. The only thing that didn't revolve around my training, or my training had to revolve around, was when I was in school and grad school, because obviously they're not going to change the class times for my training. Exactly. But other than that, everything else, relationships, work, jobs, all of that revolved around my working out. So I was willing to sacrifice what it took to be the best I could be. And I think that that's valiant. I think that's why I feel I'm comfortable retired. I look at these other lifters and I congratulate people. I don't have any like bad feelings or want people to not beat what I did. I felt like I gave everything that I had, both physically and mentally. And when you do that, there's a level of relaxation that can come from, hey, I gave it everything I possibly had for all of my prime, including resting, eating, and training. There was nothing left on the table that I could give. And if somebody's stronger or better than me after that point, then so be it. I think that people that become haters per se are the people that really inside can't succumb to the fact that they didn't give everything that they should have given to be where they wanted to be. I mean, that's what causes, I think, a lot of animosity and jealousy, is the fact that a lot of people they see somebody else better than them, but they're not willing to give up what that other person gave up to be there.
Yeah. Do you think the fitness industry does a good enough job promoting that mindset that you just discussed of being a lot more positive towards other people's goals and promoting health and the general information about genetics and substance use?
No. I mean, no, because it's not sellable. The thing of it is, I think we all can understand now that getting low T from the doctor or taking, that's still anabolic steroids. Taking anabolic steroids now is medically accepted. 10 years ago, it wasn't. So if it was really that bad for you, there wouldn't be a lot of doctors. Now, here's my point is I don't think that stuff should be taken by anybody young below the age of 25 until you put all the work in. But we know now that at moderate dosages and anti-aging and a doctor-controlled level that those things are safe. That's why all these low T centers are popping up. I don't think that genetics is talked about enough, because when you start saying that, you start singling people out and telling them that they can't have their dream. Well, I wanted to be a fucking astronaut, but I'm not smart enough for that schooling, so I understand that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think that people have conception that they think that, just because you can't be Arnold or you can't be Larry Wheels doesn't mean you can't be a badass,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the really tough part about your generation and people younger is that they have access to these extreme freakazoids that they might have never seen 30 years ago unless they picked up a magazine. So it was a little bit more behind the scenes and crazy. And I think in some ways having that stuff out in the public is almost bad, because it makes people want to take shortcuts and do things they're not probably long-term supposed to do to try to get there, when somebody can't sit them down to give them a come to Jesus meeting and say, hey, look, you need to put the work in, you need to not compare yourself to other people,
Exactly.
Better yourself, and then find out where that takes you. Wherever that takes you, be happy with. Don't worry about trying to be the best in the world. If that's meant to be for you, it'll be there. But the point is that you got people that want to be the best in the world and they've never even broke a state record. Let me tell you something, Charles Poliquin, which all young guys should know. So if you can find tons of Charles Poliquin's website, articles all over the website, all over the web, but he was an amazing coach. But I'll tell you what, he had one of the best sayings I ever heard, and it really fits your and younger generation, is people tend to overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 5.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard him say that at least 20 times when we did seminars together, and it really stuck in my head.
Yeah, exactly. And just constantly bringing the hard work that I feel like nowadays you just don't really see. People, especially my age, are consistent for maybe a month, maybe even a year, and then they fall off the bandwagon for months, weeks at a time. They lose it all. They become demotivated. They see the freaks on Instagram pulling 700 pounds or more at 18 years old who have been training consistently, have great genetics, and they compare themselves to that person, thinking that why can't I have this? Why isn't this something that I can physically do, without realizing the work that goes into it long term? When you have been training the Army and the military contractors, the Rangers, the Special Forces, the people who are the best of the best, what is the common mindset that you see that makes them as great as they are?
They're very good at basically funneling in, like putting a horse on blinders, where they can only focus on the task at hand. They don't have these other things going through their head. Once something is directed to them, they're going to do it until it's done, period. There is no off switch until the job is done. That's the difference between special forces guys and even basic military, is those dudes, when they get a task handed to them to do, they are going to go 100 miles an hour and get it done. No matter if that's running 25 miles, if that's having to, carry shit up 100 flights of stairs. They might puke 20 times doing it, but they're not going to stop until it's done. These guys' mentality is just unbelievable. I never really realized what that kind of toughness was until I was really close with those guys and really watched them do things that were literally just unbelievable. Mm-hmm. Like the things that I watched them do were just crazy. And you realize that the average person, it's not that they physically can't do it, they mentally can't do it. Like the people's mental capacity to do stuff was so insane that's why a lot of those guys that get out of special forces and higher level Delta teams, they always do so well in business and so well in other parts of their life, because they're so driven. They're so focused that they can attack almost anything in life and succeed with it.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of respect for those dudes. You know what I mean?
How do you develop that mindset? If you're thinking about a person, a younger person who just doesn't have any discipline, how do you gain that?
That's a really tough one. I'm almost to the point that I think a lot of that is you just have it or you don't. I don't know. You can't make someone tough. You really can't. I mean, you can help them. You might be able to polish them if they're semi-tough. You can make them tougher. But if you're taking a person that's so mentally weak, never had any, challenges, never had any physical or emotional like drive, I'm not so sure that you could turn that person into a special forces athlete or even a great lifter. The real thing that separates people like special forces guys and elite level powerlifters and any kind of athletes is the discipline and the drive and the focus, especially the greats. You look at guys like, and I'm going back old school, but you look at guys like Jerry Rice, one of the best receivers ever. If you saw his work ethic to stay in the league as long as he did, dude, the average person couldn't do 5 minutes of his workouts. He used to run up like the side of hills in San Francisco as a warm-up. I mean, just doing crazy stuff. Yeah. So my point is like, I think the easiest thing or the best advice I can give a beginner is to kind of put your hoodie on and look down and focus on putting your foot one step in front of the other and try to block out all of the white noise, all of the things like other people doing other things and this person's better than me and this person's taking these supplements. Dude, none of that matters. It's all about mental focus and intensity and focusing on your personal goals to get better and blocking everything else out. And you'd be surprised if you keep your head down and put one foot in front of the other for 5 years, where you would be, and everybody would be looking at how to get to you, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I always say to people is like, put your head down, put your hoodie up, and look down and put one foot in front of the other. Well, whether that's going to school or getting stronger or being more physically fit or whatever it is, or nutrition and getting up and prepping your meals every day, put one foot in front of the other and stop worrying about what everybody else is doing. And the other thing you need to look at is there are 3 pillars that a person has to have for you to listen to. This is just my opinion. 1, did they go to education for what they're telling you? Because any asshole can walk into a gym and act like he knows everything and he never went to study outside of his wheelbox. Number 2, how strong is that person? Is that person insanely strong? Because to get super strong, yeah, you got to have some genetics, but you also got to stay away from injury and get pretty smart because it's hard to get super strong. I'm sure you have a couple of lifts that you've done yourself where putting 5 pounds on it seems like 10 miles long, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. At a certain point, stronger than the ceiling limit is hard. Number 3, how long did they stay good? So if they weren't able to stay good for at least 10 years in their respective area or sport, then you need to take what they say with a grain of salt. So that's education, level of strength, and how long did they stay that strong. If they did that for over 10 or 12 years, then they probably have something very special to say to you, right? If they didn't, then the chances are what they're saying is either they're a freak or that they're blowing smoke up your ass.
Yeah, I love that, honestly.
Or trying to sell you a supplement or trying to sell you some kind of smoke and mirrors or some kind of snake oil. Those 3 things, they can't be bought. They have to be earned. I mean, you have to earn them all the way.
Yeah. And once you put it like that, and you really start applying that to the people who are in the fitness industry, it narrows down the numbers by a lot. I mean, you see people idolizing David Lade. I mean, he's injured right now, snapped his back after deadlifting around 700 pounds, but he's not in the game anymore. No education. You see people, the bodybuilders who promote supplements, how long are they going to be good? Are they even considered good right now based on like their lifespan that they might have due to the substances that they consume? And it's crazy.
Yeah. So let's look at some top people that I think that younger guys need to be looking at and making sure that they understand. And don't get me wrong, I don't agree with everything that these guys say, but they have to have something to be this. Yes. 1, Stan Efford, greatest powerlifter bodybuilder mixtures before Larry Wheels, but still, in my opinion, better because he got an IFBB Pro card.
Mm-hmm.
So that means he was a top bodybuilder. He didn't just do a bodybuilding show. He had an IFBB Pro card and had world records in powerlifting and did both of those feats at over 40 years old.
Yeah.
And had 2 businesses before he was 35 that were worth over $20 million each.
And he's the vertical diet now, which has changed thousands of people's lives.
So my point is, you can't be a dumbass and have all those areas covered. Yeah. Multi-millionaire business starter, IFBB Pro card holder, multiple world record breaker. Dude, are you serious? Like everybody should be listening to Rhino's rants, and everybody should be listening to what he has to say. And now he's 56 years old, and he's more cut than 90% of the bodybuilders, and he's 55 years old. Are you serious? Yeah. The next guy you have to kind of keep in mind is Michael Hearn. Michael Hearn, right? He sells a lot of products and does a lot of weird shit, but that dude knows how to train, and he's never been injured. And he's 52.
And he's still getting better. And I swear he gets bigger every year, bigger and leaner every year. It's crazy.
And he stays leaner. He stays lean all year round. It's not like he gets lean, then gets fat, and then gets lean. He stays looking good year round, and he's over 50. Now, we're looking at some key indicators here. Over 50 with careers longer than 25 years, and they have other things beyond training that makes them super good. Multi-millionaire businesses, real estate, things of that nature. The point is they have their shit together, right?
Yeah.
So if we look at those 2 guys as a quick example, those are the kind of guys you should be looking up to as mentors, trying to absorb what they know and try to see how their paths are. Because let's face it, who doesn't want to have $30 million in the bank, be one of the most shredded guys in the world and one of the strongest guys in the world, and be able to retain that in your 50s?
Yeah.
That means you can't just be you have to have work ethic and you have to have structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are just 2 guys right off the top of my head, and there's plenty of others that you can find. But like I said, do they have education in it? Do they have longevity in it? And how good were they for how long?
Yeah, I love that. It's crazy. And it narrows it down by a lot and weeding out all the misinformation. Crazy.
It at least pulls 95% of the exercise and fitness industry and throws them straight in the trash.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, another person I wanted to ask you about, what is your opinion on the Westside Barbell?
Well, I mean, that's where I came from. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I lifted there from 99 to 07. So there were a lot of things that Louis showed me. There were a lot of things that Westside Barbell taught me about the conjugate system. They were the first ones to kind of bring the Russian system to me. I just felt like I advanced it farther for my own personal reasons. Like Louis has been really good about taking people and getting them super strong. But once he can't figure out what's in his mind to make them better, he gets frustrated and usually kicks them out. So what you find is that a lot of people that go to Westside don't have minds of their own or how to advance themselves. And the reason that Louis and I always had a tarnished relationship was because when Louis and I parted ways and I went on my own, I actually got better because I learned the system better for me. Now, I'm not saying that what I did was better than what Louis had, but it was better for me. And that's really the hard part is like, the problem is when you get super strong is that at that point you have to be taking detailed mental notes on what your body feels, how it's supposed to react to things. And then eventually you're going to have to be your own coach because the problem is nobody's you. So as much as I learned from Louis what to do, I also learned from Westside Barbell a lot of what not to do. And that's what made me great.
Yeah. And with that, you had that adaptability that Westside Barbell obviously didn't have for you. And so much of lifting is individual. I mean, our bodies genetically differ so much person to person, even though a lot of it's the same. Small differences in training or biomechanics can make a massive difference, lifter to lifter.
Let's go into that a little bit. So if you have 2 different types of lifters, and there's all kinds of things in between, but this is an interesting topic that Charles Poliquin used to talk about a lot, but it makes sense. You have high serotonin lifters and you have high dopamine lifters. Now, There's a big difference between those two.
Yes.
High serotonin lifters can train very similar constantly and not get burned out. They can do very similar exercises, very similar movements. I'm not saying that's a better way to train. It's just the way most people's brains are wired. You see a lot of great Soviet lifters are high serotonin, because high serotonin freakazoids like Milanichev are very easy to coach because you just keep making them do the same thing over and over again and they get better. Now you have this other side people, they're high dopamine, which is somebody like me. They need a lot of variety. They need a lot of different movements, and they need a lot of different kinds of exercises and intensities and energy systems to be successful. But at the end of the day, the high dopamine lifter has more potential, but needs higher levels of coaching. And that's why you find a lot of people don't gravitate towards conjugate, because one, they're not honest with themselves on what they need to train, right? They want to do what they like versus what they need. But two, they don't know what to rotate. They're rotating just to rotate, which makes you no better than CrossFit. You have to know where your weaknesses are, which exercises need to be applied at what time, and how long to use them before they're not useful anymore. Well, on a serotonin lifter, you don't really have to worry about that, which makes it very easy to coach.
Yeah, exactly. When it comes to switching up training methods, is conjugate the system that you recommend for most strength athletes, or is there any other forms of periodization that would you say are superior in some scenarios over the others?
I think that the only thing that makes conjugate superior to all methods is its adaptability. That's it. There might be a method that works better for an individual, but because conjugate focuses on multiple different energy systems and different contraction types, it's only as strong as the sword of the person that wields that sword. Meaning that a very advanced person with high levels of knowledge, knowing what an athlete needs, the conjugate system, as far as my opinion goes, as far as physics is concerned, and understanding contraction types and force velocity curves, there's really no way to beat that type of training. But it takes a very smart man to run it. It takes a very smart man to know what to change, which makes it a complex system, right?
Yes.
Is it easy to fly a fucking space shuttle? No, right? That's why there's only a handful of people in each generation that are ever selected to fly a shuttle. In my opinion, training conjugate is like being an astronaut. You got to know, you got to be a pilot at the highest level in order to force and focus the right area to do it. And that's why everybody leads towards the more simple type training philosophies like linear periodization and these other things, because it's easy to understand, right?
Yeah.
But here's my thing. Here's my big thing for those of you guys that are just thinking about how to train. The human organism is one of the most complex systems in the entire earth, maybe in the galaxy. You have hormones, you have biomechanics, you have muscle fiber typing, you have energy systems, all of these things. And you're going to tell me that you're going to get great off of a very simplistic system that doesn't take any of that into account? Give me a fucking break.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And so often, I feel like everything kind of in this podcast goes back to adaptability and people's ability to change and adapt with how their body feels and responds to certain stimulus. And the mindset too behind it all. I mean, so many lifters get stuck in their ways. They don't change what they need to change. And especially peers around my age. You see them, they go hard in the gym. They hit the same lifts every time. They train bench, they train chest, they train back. And they don't progress because they're not willing to try a technique that just might feel a little bit out of their wheelhouse.
So think about what you're saying. You said chest and back and bench press, right?
Yeah.
But what if their weakness was their triceps, and now they don't train their triceps hard enough? Their bench isn't going to go anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah, it's going to forever be stalled. Even if their chest is trained to completion, they're never going to be able to get that lockup portion to be able to improve it. It's crazy.
Yeah. You have to know where your weaknesses are, and that's where everybody falters, because sometimes training your weaknesses isn't what you like.
Exactly. Yeah. Would you say that I feel like so many people just don't know your story about being hit by the car. Would you say that if you had gotten hit by that car when you were young, that you wouldn't have been the world champion that you became today?
You know, it's a mixed bag. I mean, in some ways I look at it and go, what if I wasn't hit by that car? I might have been the best squatter ever, regardless of body weight, you know, and way longer than I ever did, or maybe hit a number that would have been nearly impossible to beat. Then again, as I started to get smarter in school and got advanced knowledge passed my way, the Soviets were experimenting, taking children and putting them in 8 and 10 week full casts in their legs, because what they found was through muscle biopsies is that increased higher amounts of type 2 fiber. So maybe
Really?
because I was wrecked and I had to be bedridden for a year, that might have turned some of my type 1 fibers in my legs to type 2.
Yeah.
There is some research to say that overseas. So here's my point. My point is that maybe the car accident made me what I was, or maybe it held me back. But unless I could live my life all over again and redo everything, to put myself in the same situation and then take myself out of that situation, how do you really know? I think that's the hardest part with what we do. We get one deck of cards with our genetics. We get one deck of cards with our time. We get one deck of cards with our motivation points and how long we're willing to stick through stuff. And you just got to do the best with what you got. So maybe the car accident made me what I was, but maybe it set me back. Who knows?
Exactly. Yeah, it's impossible to tell. And yeah, absolutely crazy. And the story, your story, I think, is one of the ones that stands out when compared to a lot of other people. So many people, they get in the gym, they get successful, but they don't have the intensity that I feel like you bring to the table, and a wide range of experiences as well too.
Well, it's going to be interesting because I'm supposed to go on Stone Cold Steve Austin's podcast here probably within the next 2 to 4 months. So when that happens, me and him have been talking back and forth. He saw my Wening warm-ups, and he actually messaged me on Instagram about it.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we've been talking back and forth. So I'm going to go on his podcast. But it'll be interesting to see when a vast array of people will hear my story. You know, I am the only person I know of that has had that type of physical trauma done to them and did those kind of numbers of any sort.
Yeah.
You know, you don't hear of a person getting hit by a car and being a full bed casts up to their waist for a year and playing pro football. You don't hear of a guy breaking an all-time world record. You know, like for me, I was lucky just to be able to save my legs. And I don't know how I got to where I was, other than maybe it was a mixture of luck and stupidity and just being able to train hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Like when it hurt, I just kept pushing right through it, you know?
Mm-hmm. And so many people would let that experience break them. I feel like, let alone let it make them as successful as you are. And going back to what you said earlier about you can't really teach the mental willpower aspect. It has to. I feel like it's almost more imbued through experiences like that. Either can traumatize somebody or can make them into the man and beast, the force of nature that they are and will eventually become.
And that's the difference, I think, is I took all my negatives and figured out a way to make them a positive, and I don't think that's a natural human reaction. I think a lot of average people would take a bad situation and they would just kind of, you know, dive on it and just make them go backwards instead of forwards. And you know, I could have looked back and go, why did I have my legs broken, and why was I in full-legged casting in a wheelchair for a year? Why did my dad die at 13? You ever hear people that are like grow up in like impoverished areas and like, well, I grew up in the ghetto and I didn't have any money and I never had any way to get, dude, you had all kinds of opportunities around you. You just weren't smart enough to look them up and diligent enough to figure them out. I mean, nobody paid for my school. Nobody helped me with bills. Nobody got me into graduate school. Nobody broke and squatted my world records. You know, I think the difference is you can, you know, I think sometimes pressure turns people into diamonds or shit. And then whoever that person is, it doesn't, who knows? You know what I mean? It's always a crapshoot.
I totally agree with that. And it's absolutely crazy seeing it all laid out on paper like this. Finishing it off, I have a few more minutes left. Out of everything we talked about during this podcast, mindset-wise, development-wise, if you had one piece of information that you'd recommend to young lifters and young people who want that life development, they want to max out, what would that piece of information be?
Well, I think, like I said, just keep the hoodie down, put one foot in front of the other, and focus on passions that you have in life. I love everything that I do, and that's why I'm good at it, and that's why I'm successful. I never looked at this as a business. I never looked at this as a way to get rich or a way to be better than other people. I looked at it as, I love to do this. Let's see where it can take me, right? I really strongly feel that if you're the best at whatever you do in the world, you will be highly paid for it. But if the money is your drive, then what you're going to find is all that shit shallow and it doesn't last.
Crazy. Yeah, honestly, if anyone's watching this, I'd recommend you write down that last piece of information. I feel like that mindset and that willingness to persevere through anything is what's going to get so many people, and what has gotten you, what has gotten all the other really successful high-end people through the hard points of their lives and gotten them that success that they desire. So I appreciate you for coming on, man. This means so much to me. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all, man.
Where can they find you on social media and your website?
Yeah, so my website is winningstrength.com. So it's Wenning. We have manuals, equipment. We have a Patreon channel where I answer all questions. We have all different tiers. So the highest tiers get all the manuals for free. They get all the downloads for free. They get all the pre-videos before we post them on YouTube. If you want free stuff, you go on the YouTube channel, Winning Strength. Same thing, again, spelled Wenning with no spaces, Winning Strength. We probably have 250 help videos on there. You can also see other things that I'm involved with, like cars and motorcycles, all kinds of stuff. I've done podcasts on the Winning Strength YouTube channel with Flex Wheeler and Bill Kazmaier and Michael Hearn and Stan Efforting. So if you want to hear some really cool stuff, that's on there. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's at real Matt Wenning with no spaces. But just to remind the young guys, we don't take any shit on those channels. So if you post something stupid, I'm deleting that shit, right? And then you can also find Ludus Magnus Gym. That's also on Instagram. And my assistant, Teddy, posts a lot of client help, like what exercises we do and how to perform them correctly. So I'd say Patreon and the website and the Instagram is where you're going to find most of the stuff.
Hey, while everyone's watching that, go check this guy out. I probably watched about 100 or so YouTube videos last night, trying to learn as much as I can and prepare for this podcast. But absolutely one of the most informational people in the fitness industry in general. And he has the education that we talked about earlier, the work experience, the longevity to back up what he says. So go make sure you check him out. And I had one more question, just for myself, a little bit, one of the things that I wanted to answer. So many people, they give the sumo deadlift crap. Oh, I want to hear your thoughts on this yourself, because I'm a sumo deadlifter. I pulled a decent number. Obviously, when it's compared to your massive numbers, it's nothing. But I got 605 on a stiff bar a few weeks ago.
That's pretty good.
It's decent, and I'm happy with it. I'm trying to get better, and there's a little bit of round in the back. And I wanted to hear your opinion on the rounded back for the deadlift and on sumo in general, just real quick before we finish this.
Yeah. Well, it's not a short answer, but I'll give you the best answer I can.
Okay.
I feel that any position in deadlift, anybody that wants to deadlift, I already have admiration for you. So the thing of it is it's not an easy lift, and what you're seeing a lot of these guys pull is not only a mixture of hard work, but it's also biomechanical efficiency. So some of these dudes have really long arms. You look at guys like what's that Russian dude, the little guy that pulls all the way. I guess the name's always skips my mind.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
It doesn't matter. But my point is some of those guys, when I see their genetic prowess and how they're built and what they can pull, I'm not as impressed as guys, say, like Half Thor, that can deadlift like 930 in a powerlifting meet and he's 6'8". Like, dude, that is a long way to deadlift, right? So my point is that I don't feel that sumo is cheating compared to conventional, because although you might shorten the bar path, you're using harder muscles to activate. So the adductors, the abductors, the glutes, the hamstrings all have to play a key role. And what I find is that usually people that are good sumo deadlifters, are considered patient pullers, meaning they can grab the bar and it may not move right off the ground right away, but they can muscle through it in 4 to 6 seconds. What I find with conventional deadlifters is they're a little bit more explosive, and they tend to be in a better position to have more power, but then the sticking point rises to above the knee, and in the conventional position, it's harder to lock things out. Now, both of them have their pluses and minuses depending on how you're built and what type of fiber you have. So I pulled conventional in competition because I was explosive, but I trained a ton sumo because my body could withstand more sumo volume. It didn't seem to mess with my back or my posture as much. Now, as far as pulling with a rounded back, I think that in a competition, you have to really set yourself down and have a really long conversation with yourself and find out what's your goal. If your goal is postural integrity and your goal is longevity and your goal is health, then I don't think you should ever pull with a rounded back. If your goal is all-time world records and you're trying to be the baddest dude you can and you're willing to sacrifice sitting in a wheelchair at 55, then by all means pull whatever you need to pull with to get the number you want to get. But what I would find, I think, is that a rounded back, although shortens the distance to the bar, it's going to cause a lot of compression issues on the vertebrae. So if you guys look up a book called Science and Practice of Strength Training, it actually shows the kilogram pressure at the disc. And with 300 kilos in your hands, which is about 660 pounds, when you round your back, it actually turns into somewhere around 500 kilos on your discs.
That's insane.
So if you want spine health, then no matter what you pull, don't let your back round. If you want world records and you don't care about health, which obviously if you're going to go to that level, you have to kind of balance out the risk to benefit ratio, then I would say you need to make sure you maintain a proper neutral spine or maybe even slightly arched spine. Those would be my opinions over long term. I've just seen a lot of guys fuck up their backs pulling rounded just to try to get big numbers. And trust me when I tell you, when you see him at 50 years old, you don't want that back.
Yeah. And to elaborate on that a little bit more, would you say that some thoracic bend in the upper portion of the back, never lumbar, would you say that some bend in the thoracic portion of the spine would be considered okay for maximum amount of lifts, assuming that there's no pain and no
yeah.
Okay.
I think that sometimes it just has to be done.
Okay.
Now, do I think that it's good even though there's no pain? My opinion would be probably no. That would mean that your spine is not as strong as your legs or your hips, and that's the last kind of draw for your back to be able to do that. And then the other problem is it creates a poor posture movement pattern. So what you find is that people that round under max weights, they start to get sloppier under lighter weights, and then over time that becomes their natural position. And now you got something that's nearly impossible to fix. The body is really interesting piece of machinery. It tends to find the easiest way to do things, even if it damages itself. If you look at it from a longevity perspective, the body really wasn't ever designed to live much past 50. If we go back 100 years ago, what was the average age? Right? How long did people live?
A lot shorter than now.
50, a lot shorter than now. So my point was that was the way we were forever. So I'm not saying it was good or bad, but my point is that now we live way longer. And I think with that becomes a whole nother level of responsibility of trying not to damage your body nearly as much. So what I think the big question that all of your younger people watching need to start thinking about is, I am 100% component of getting super strong. I'm 100% component of reaching maximal goals, but I'm also a 100% component of learning how to get to that point without increasing mileage. Yeah. And that becomes something that's very difficult to do. And you're going to need a master person to do that. You know, that's why we do the online coaching, and I try to put out as many manuals as I possibly can to give people at least an idea of how to do it smarter. I truly believe that there is a better way to get strong, and there is a way to reach your goals without creating damage. And that should be what we always talk about, is how do we get better without getting beat up? I mean, that's really, in my opinion, the real question that we should be asking ourselves.
I definitely agree. Make sure you go check this guy out. He's the real deal. I feel like so many people watching this will have their lives changed, and how they view lifting, how they view development. The knowledge and the experience that you just brought for the last hour and a few minutes that we've been talking is insane. So please check him out. Thank you again for coming on. I appreciate this more than you can know. Means a lot to a small guy like me. So I appreciate it, man.
No problem, dude.
Perfect.